When I saw her name on the wedding invitation, my hands went cold. There, written in the elegant gold print, were two names that didn't belong together: Daniel and Clara. And Clara was my best friend. The air seemed to thicken around me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight slanting through the blinds, slicing across the white envelope like a cruel spotlight. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. It had been 3 years since Daniel and I separated, quietly, without drama. No screaming, no lawyers clawing through our lives. Just silence and exhaustion, like two actors walking off stage after the final act of a play no one clapped for. And now here he was, starting over. With her. Back then, before everything unraveled, I used to think of Clara as the sister I never had. We'd met in our teens. She was loud, curious, always laughing at her own jokes. I was quieter, the type who listened more than spoke. She called me old soul, I called her trouble. Somehow, we balanced each other out. We shared everything: clothes, secrets, heartbreaks. When Daniel came into my life, she was the first person I told. "I think he's the one," I'd whispered to her over late-night coffee in my tiny apartment. She'd grinned, half teasing. "He better be. I can't handle another one of your soulmate who can't text back" phases. She was at our wedding, wearing pale blue, holding my bouquet when I cried through my vows. Back then, I believed friendship could outlast anything. Even love. Daniel and I had a good life, or what looked like one. We bought a house with a white porch, filled it with soft music and new furniture and unspoken expectations. He was ambitious, charming in public, quiet in private. I was his anchor, he said. His calm. But calm can turn into invisibility when someone stops looking at you. The silence between us grew like mold, slowly, quietly, until it took over everything. When we finally separated, it wasn't with hatred. Just fatigue. He moved out, I stayed. We didn't even tell many people. I didn't want pity. I told Clara, though. She had moved to another city by then, working for a design firm. She sounded shocked, sympathetic, but distant. "I'm so sorry," she'd said. "You two seemed perfect." "Perfect doesn't mean happy," I replied. After that, we spoke less and less. Life, I told myself. People drift. So when that envelope came, 3 years later, I thought it was some sort of cruel joke. A different Clara, maybe. Or some other Daniel. But then I saw the photo attached inside: engagement shoot, pastel fields, sunlight in their hair. It was them. My husband. My best friend. I pressed my fingers against the picture, tracing the outline of her smile. She hadn't changed much, the same dimple on the left cheek, the same brown hair falling carelessly over her shoulders. She looked happy. Blissfully unaware. That was what confused me most. If she had known, if she'd done this knowingly, out of betrayal, I could have understood the anger. But the way she smiled, open, innocent, it was clear. She didn't know. My stomach twisted. Daniel never told her. I tried to piece it together. Maybe he'd lied about his past. Maybe he used a different name when he met her. He was always private, even with me. The type of man who locked his phone and cleared his browser history as if life itself needed secrecy. But still. Clara? Out of all the people in the world? I spent that night pacing my kitchen floor, my bare feet sticking to the cool tiles. Every memory of the two of them, brief hellos at my wedding, their laughter over wine, came back like ghosts. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. That the world wasn't cruel enough to stage this reunion of my past and present in such twisted symmetry. By morning, I made a decision. I needed to see her. I called her number. It rang, then her voice, older, steadier, filled the line. "Hello?" For a moment, I said nothing. Just listened. That familiar lilt, that warmth. I could almost forget why I'd called. "Clara, it's me," I finally said. There was a small pause, then surprise, joy. "Oh my God, Emma. After all this time?" We talked for a few minutes. She told me she'd moved back recently, that life was good, that she was engaged to someone wonderful, she said, laughing softly. "You'd love him." Would I? I almost asked. But I didn't. Instead, I told her I'd love to meet for coffee. She agreed immediately. We met that Friday at a small cafe downtown, the kind with hanging plants and coffee that smelled like roasted almonds. When I walked in, she was already there, waving from a corner booth. For a moment, it was like stepping back in time. She looked radiant, her fingers nervously twisting the engagement ring on her hand, my ring style, I realized. We hugged, and I felt the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, just like before. "It's so good to see you," she said, eyes bright. "You too," I murmured, meaning it, even through the ache. We talked about work, travel, how strange it was to be adults with bills and wrinkles. She told me she'd found someone who made her feel safe, loved, someone who had been through a rough first marriage, but was kind, devoted. When she said his name, my world tilted. Daniel. I remember the sound of it, soft, casual, like she'd said milk or sunlight. My fingers went numb around my cup. She kept talking, oblivious. About their plans, their wedding venue, his gentle way with her niece. I nodded, smiled where I could, my insides turning to glass. When the conversation ended, she squeezed my hand and said, "You have to meet him, Emma. He'd love you." I swallowed hard. "Maybe someday," I whispered. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the city lights flickering through the curtains. I could have told her then. Could have shattered that blissful ignorance with one sentence. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to see what Daniel would do when the past came knocking. Because if there's one thing I've learned, silence can be louder than truth. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's smile, wide, bright, untouched by the kind of pain I'd lived through with Daniel. I told myself I should just walk away. Let them have their life. After all, Daniel and I were over. Legally, emotionally, everything. But something about it didn't sit right. Not because of jealousy, I'd mourned that marriage long ago, but because it felt wrong. Like watching someone walk into a burning house, unaware of the smoke curling around the doorframe. Still, I didn't want to play the villain in her story. So I decided to wait. To watch. A week later, Clara texted me again. "Emma. Dinner this weekend? I want you to meet him." Smiling face with smiling eyes. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "Sure. Saturday works." I didn't tell her that Saturday was the same day Daniel and I used to celebrate our anniversary, the day we'd exchanged vows under a fading pink sky, promising things we couldn't keep. Saturday came. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, my hand brushing over old dresses, relics from a different life. I picked something neutral, a soft cream blouse and jeans. Nothing too formal, nothing too nostalgic. When I arrived at their apartment, my breath caught in my throat. The building looked new, but the view was the same skyline Daniel used to talk about, someday, when we can afford it. I rang the doorbell. My heart thudded like a slow drum. Clara opened the door with her usual burst of warmth. "Emma. Come in, come in." She hugged me tight, the smell of rosemary and butter wafting from the kitchen. And then I heard it, that voice. Deep, measured, with that familiar undercurrent of confidence I'd once found reassuring. "Who's at the door, honey?" When he stepped into view, time folded in on itself. Daniel froze. Just for a second. Then his expression rearranged, shock, recognition, and then a quick, practiced smile. "Emma," he said. Wow. It's been a while. My pulse hammered in my ears. Yes. It has. Clara looked between us, oblivious to the static filling the room. You two know each other? She asked, smiling. Daniel didn't miss a beat. Yeah, from work, he said lightly. Small world, huh? I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and nodded. Very small. Dinner was a blur of small talk and polite laughter. I sat across from them, watching their hands brush, their glances meet, the same gestures Daniel and I used to share before they became rehearsed. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward me. Uneasy, searching. He was waiting for me to explode. To reveal everything. But I didn't. Instead, I played along. Asked about their plans, their dreams, the story of how they met. We met at a charity event, Clara said, beaming. He was so kind, so steady. I smiled faintly. Steady. That's the same word I'd once used to convince myself he was safe. She went on about their trip to the coast, their wedding plans, the house hunt. I listened, every word slicing a little deeper. Daniel stayed mostly quiet. When he spoke, his voice carried a careful politeness, the kind you use when sitting on a live wire. At one point, Clara excused herself to take a call, and he and I were left alone. The silence between us was suffocating. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You can't tell her. I looked at him, this man I'd once trusted with everything, and felt something cold settle inside me. I wasn't planning to, I said quietly. He blinked, surprised. Then why are you here? I smiled faintly. Maybe I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become. His jaw tightened. People change. Yes, I said. But not always in the direction they think. Clara returned, unaware of the storm in the room. I put my polite smile back on, and the evening carried on as though nothing had cracked. When I got home that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark. I thought of Clara, how she looked at him, how her laughter filled the room like sunlight. She was in love. And she didn't know. Daniel had erased me from his story. Not a word about our marriage, our years together, or why we ended. He'd given her a blank slate built on my silence. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if staying quiet was kindness anymore. The next few weeks blurred into a strange routine. Clara and I began seeing each other more often, lunches, phone calls, wedding planning chatter. I was the old friend who'd returned just in time. Sometimes I wanted to tell her everything, to grab her shoulders and say, he's not who you think. But then I'd see how her face lit up when she talked about him, and my words would die in my throat. Instead, I started asking questions. Casual ones. How long have you known him? Does he talk about his past? She'd shrug, smiling. A little. He said he had a short first marriage that ended badly. He didn't go into detail. I didn't want to pry. My stomach turned. Short first marriage. That was how he'd reduced our 6 years together, to a footnote. One afternoon, Clara invited me over to help her pack. They were moving into a bigger house after the wedding. I sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapping dishes in paper, when I saw it, an old photo frame lying face down in a box. I picked it up. It was from one of their trips, Daniel and Clara on a pier, wind in their hair. But behind it, tucked between the frame and the cardboard backing, was another picture. One of me and Daniel. Our wedding day. I froze. He hadn't even destroyed it, just hidden it behind the new picture. My hands shook as I slipped it back into place. That was when it hit me. He wasn't just lying to Clara. He was pretending, trying to rewrite history while keeping the proof close, like some sick secret trophy. I realized then, silence wasn't noble anymore. It was enabling. That night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror and asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. Who was I protecting, her, or him? Because maybe the truth wasn't just his to hide. Maybe it was mine to tell. It started small, as betrayal often does. A shadow in a sentence. A hesitation mid-laugh. Clara had begun to mention Daniel more in our conversations, not out of pride, but out of unease she couldn't name. One afternoon, we were having tea on her balcony. She stirred her cup slowly, her ring catching the light. "Do you ever feel," she said, eyes distant, "like someone loves you but not all of you?" I looked at her, unsure where she was going. "What do you mean?" She exhaled softly. "Daniel's wonderful, truly. But sometimes, when I talk about certain things, old memories, people from my past, he gets this look. Like I've reminded him of something painful. He shuts down." I sipped my tea to steady my voice. "Have you asked him why?" She shook her head. "No. I don't want to ruin things. We're getting married soon. Maybe I'm overthinking." I smiled gently, though my stomach twisted. "Maybe," I said. But deep down, I knew she wasn't imagining it. Daniel always carried his guilt quietly, like a man walking on glass, pretending it didn't cut. The first real crack came a week later. She called me late at night, voice trembling. "Emma. I think Daniel lied to me." I sat up instantly. "What happened?" "I found a box," she said, sniffling. "In the closet. He told me it was just old paperwork. But tonight, I opened it, and there were wedding photos inside. Not of us." My throat went dry. "Wedding photos?" "Yes," she whispered. But I couldn't see her face clearly. They were half-burned, like he'd tried to destroy them. The bride's hair looked dark. "Like yours." The silence stretched between us, heavy and dangerous. "What did he say when you asked?" I managed to ask. "He said it was from a friend's wedding. But I know he's lying, Emma." He looked terrified. Her words hit like a drumbeat against my ribs. He hadn't told her. Not even now. "Clara," I said carefully, "you deserve honesty. If something feels off, you have a right to ask for the truth." "I know," she said, voice cracking. I love him so much." When we hung up, I sat there in the dark, the glow of my phone screen fading. Somewhere out there, my best friend was crying over the same man who'd once made me do the same. The next day, I couldn't resist. I went to see Daniel. He lived in a neat little townhouse, the kind he always said he'd buy, when life got simpler. When he opened the door, his face drained of color. "Emma," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping past him before he could object. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged, minimalist decor, the faint smell of coffee and cedar. But it all felt sterile. Like a stage. He crossed his arms. "If this is about Clara." "It is," I interrupted. "She found the photos." He froze. His jaw clenched. "She called me last night," I continued. "She's confused. Scared. You've built your new life on lies, Daniel. Did you really think the past would stay buried?" He turned away, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't even know you two were friends until after we started dating." "That's a lie," I said quietly. "You met her at our wedding." He winced. "I barely remembered her. It wasn't intentional." "Then why not tell her the truth when you realized?" He looked at me then, eyes hollow. "Because she loves me. And I couldn't risk losing that again." I felt something sharp and cold rise inside me. "You mean you couldn't risk losing her the way you lost me?" He didn't answer. I took a breath, steadying myself. "You're marrying a woman who thinks she knows you. But she doesn't. And that's on you, not me." He stared at me, defiant. "You wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said softly. You want to rewrite your story. Erase the parts that make you look small. He flinched. When I left, the air outside felt heavy, like the sky before a storm. The next time Clara called, her tone was different. Hollow. I confronted him, she said. He told me everything. Or most of it. I held my breath. What did he say? That he used to be married. To someone named Emma. He said it ended badly, that she cheated on him. The world tilted. I see, I whispered. Isn't that awful, she said. To have gone through that kind of betrayal? I couldn't speak. My vision blurred with tears I didn't even realize I was holding back. He hadn't just lied. He'd painted me as the villain in her story. I felt something inside me fracture, not from heartbreak this time, but from the quiet, relentless injustice of it. Clara, I said finally, my voice steady but low, I think there's more you need to know. We met the next morning at a park near her place. The air smelled like rain and fresh earth. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back loosely. She clutched a paper cup in both hands as if it could anchor her. Before I say anything, I began carefully, I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. Her brow furrowed. Emma, what are you talking about? I took a shaky breath. That woman in the photos. The one he said cheated on him. She nodded slowly. That's me. The color drained from her face. What? I reached into my bag and pulled out an old wedding photo, one Daniel hadn't managed to burn. Him in a navy suit. Me in white. Our hands joined. She stared at it for a long time. Her breath hitched. No, this can't. It's the truth, I said softly. We were married for 6 years. She shook her head, tears gathering. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know until you showed me the invitation. And when I did, I thought you knew. Her lips trembled. He said you hurt him. A bitter laugh escaped me. I left because he broke me quietly. Not with cheating, but with indifference. With silence. With the kind of cruelty that hides behind politeness. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I believed him, Emma. I defended him. I know, I whispered. That's what he's good at. She sank onto the bench, pressing her palms over her face. I sat beside her, neither of us speaking for a long time. Finally, she looked up, her voice barely audible. What do I do now? I met her gaze. Whatever lets you live with yourself. Not with him. For a long moment after I told her, the world seemed to pause. Only the distant sound of traffic filled the silence between us, a steady hum that made everything feel strangely unreal. Clara sat there, gripping the photo with trembling fingers, her engagement ring catching the light. She looked so fragile, I almost regretted saying it. But there was no going back now. Finally, she whispered, I need to hear it from him. I nodded slowly. You should. She stood abruptly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Come with me. I hesitated. Clara. No, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor. If I go alone, he'll twist it. You know he will. There was a quiet strength in her tone that hadn't been there before. The kind of courage that only comes when the illusion finally cracks. So I followed her. When we arrived at Daniel's townhouse, the sky was heavy with clouds. The air smelled like iron and rain, that charged scent before a storm breaks. He opened the door, clearly startled to see both of us. Clara, he said, confused. Then his gaze flicked to me, and his face hardened. What's going on? She didn't answer. She just held up the photo. Who is this? She asked quietly. His eyes darted between us. Clara, I can explain. Who is this? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's Emma. My ex-wife. Your ex-wife, she repeated, her voice flat. The one you said cheated on you? He froze. Her voice rose, sharp now, cutting through the thick air. You told me she destroyed you. You told me she lied, that she ruined your life. Was that true? Daniel glanced at me, then back at her. You don't understand. Then make me, she snapped. Because right now, I feel like a fool. He exhaled slowly, the practiced calm of a man cornered. Fine. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered. The past is the past. I've changed. Clara laughed, a hollow, heartbroken sound. You didn't think it mattered that your fiancée was best friends with your ex-wife? His face paled. I didn't know at first. And later, she pressed. When you did know? He opened his mouth, but no words came. I watched him, this man who used to make me feel small with silence, now struggling under its weight himself. For once, it wasn't me who filled the quiet. Clara turned to me then, eyes glassy. Is it true, Emma? Did you cheat? I met her gaze steadily. No. She nodded, as if she'd known the answer before asking. Then she looked back at him. I gave you everything, she said softly. And you built it on a lie. He stepped forward, desperate now. Clara, I love you. Don't let her ruin this. She flinched. Don't you dare put this on her. The tension snapped like a string. You know, she said, tears streaking her cheeks, when you asked me to marry you, I thought I'd finally found someone safe. Someone who wouldn't lie. But you were just polishing your same old habits and calling it redemption. Daniel's voice dropped, defensive. You think you're so perfect? Everyone has secrets. She shook her head slowly. Yes. But not everyone hides them behind another person's pain. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain began outside, tapping against the windows like an afterthought. Then Clara took off her ring and placed it gently on the table. You can keep this, she said quietly. You seem to like collecting old stories. And with that, she turned and walked out the door. I lingered a moment longer. Daniel's face was blank, pale. Are you satisfied now? He said bitterly. I looked at him, the man I'd once loved, the man who'd twisted the truth until even I doubted it. No, I said softly. Just free. Then I followed her out into the rain. We sat in my car afterward, neither of us speaking. The windshield blurred with raindrops, city lights smearing into watercolor streaks. Finally, Clara whispered, How did you survive him? I smiled faintly, tired. I didn't, at first. I lost myself trying to keep him happy. But eventually, I realized some people only love reflections of themselves, not the person standing beside them. She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. He made me feel like I was safe, until I started seeing who he really was. That's how they work, I said quietly. They build comfort around you like a cage. She looked out the window. I can't believe I almost married him. You didn't, I said gently. You saw the truth in time. That counts for something. She turned to me, eyes full of both sorrow and relief. I don't know whether to thank you or hate you. Maybe both, I said with a sad smile. She let out a breath, half laugh, half sob, and we sat there for a while, just listening to the rain. The next few days were quiet. Clara went to stay with her sister, and Daniel didn't try to contact me again. Maybe he finally understood that his stories had run out of listeners. But the aftermath lingered. Word got around, as it always does. Our small circle of old friends pieced together the truth. Whispers turned into pitying looks. I didn't care much, but Clara did. She hated being the woman who didn't know. One evening, she called me again. I saw him today, she said. My heart tightened. Why? He came to my office. Tried to apologize. Said he wanted to explain, to start over. What did you say? She hesitated. I told him no. That I'm done being anyone's second version of the truth. I smiled quietly to myself. Good. She paused. But it still hurts, Emma. I know, I said softly. Healing always does. But pain loses its power when you stop feeding it with denial. There was silence on the line for a moment, then a small laugh. You always were the wise one. No, I said. Just the one who learned late. That night, I finally packed away the last remnants of my marriage, the photo albums, the letters, even the worn ring box. I didn't burn them or throw them out. That night, I finally packed away the last remnants of my marriage, the photo albums, the letters, even the worn ring box. I didn't burn them or throw them out. I just placed them in a small wooden chest and closed the lid. Because closure isn't always destruction. Sometimes, it's simply choosing not to reopen the wound. The following weeks were a quiet storm. In a small town like ours, secrets travel faster than apologies. You don't have to tell your story for people to rewrite it for you. By the second week, everyone from the florist to the church secretary had heard some version of what happened. Clara's fiancé turned out to be her best friend's ex-husband. They said it with that mix of pity and curiosity people reserve for tragedy that isn't theirs. I avoided the gossip as best I could. But Clara couldn't. Her office was filled with whispers, polite smiles that vanished the moment she turned her back. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment looking tired, not the kind of tired sleep could fix, but the kind that settles in the bones. They look at me like I should have known, she said, sitting heavily on the couch. Like I'm stupid for not seeing it. I handed her a cup of tea. You couldn't have known, Clara. He made sure of that. She stared into the steam, her voice quiet. I keep thinking about the little things, how he'd avoid certain topics, change the subject when I mentioned old friends. It all seems so obvious now. That's hindsight, I said gently. It always looks clearer once you're out of the fog. She gave a small, bitter laugh. You know what hurts the most? That he's not even embarrassed. He's acting like we overreacted. I sighed. That's how men like him survive. They convince themselves they're victims of everyone else's emotions. A few days later, I went to the grocery store and saw Daniel. He was standing in the produce aisle, examining avocados like they held the answers to his new life. When he saw me, he froze, then forced a smile. Emma, he said. How are you? I stared at him for a moment, then replied evenly, better than you look. He laughed softly, trying to lighten the moment. Guess I deserved that. I didn't respond. I just started walking away. But he followed, his voice lower now. You didn't have to tell her, he said. You could have left it alone. I turned to him, my expression calm. And you could have told her yourself. He frowned. You always make everything so moral. Someone has to, I said. He smirked slightly, that same half-smile that used to make me feel small. But now it just looked pathetic. You think you won? I shook my head. There are no winners in lies, Daniel. Just people who finally stop losing. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, shame, maybe. Or fear. But he covered it quickly. As I left, I realized something simple but powerful. He no longer had any power over me. His voice didn't echo anymore. A few days later, Clara called again. He's been messaging me, she said, her voice trembling. Long paragraphs, apologies, promises to change. Don't respond, I said softly. Not yet. Not while you're still bleeding from it. But part of me wants to hear him out, she admitted. I just want closure. I understood that ache too well, the need for answers from the person who caused the wound. The cruel irony that the only one who can explain your pain is the one who gave it to you. Closure doesn't come from them, I said gently. It comes when you realize you'll never get the truth you wanted, only the one that exists. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He invited me to meet. Said he wants to apologize face to face. Do you want to go?" I asked. "I think I need to." I hesitated, then nodded. "Then I'll come with you." The cafe was nearly empty that evening. Rain pattered softly against the windows, the kind of steady drizzle that makes everything feel suspended. Daniel was already there, sitting by the window. He looked older than I remembered, not physically, but in that tired, hollow way people get when their lies start weighing more than their pride. Clara sat across from him. I stayed at the next table, close enough to see, far enough to give her space. He started talking immediately. "I made mistakes," he said, hands clasped together. I panicked when I realized who Emma was. "I didn't want to lose you." "You lied for months," Clara said softly. "That's not panic. That's calculation." He winced. "I thought if I could just start over." "You can't build love on ashes," she interrupted. Her voice didn't shake. It was calm, measured, like she'd found something inside herself that couldn't be broken anymore. Daniel leaned forward. "I love you, Clara. I know I hurt you, but I can make it right." She looked at him for a long time, then shook her head. "You love the version of me that didn't know the truth. But that woman's gone." He blinked, caught off guard by her steadiness. "So that's it?" "Yes," she said quietly. "That's it." She stood, slipped her bag over her shoulder, and walked past me without looking back. Daniel sat there, staring into his untouched coffee, the steam fading, like everything else he'd built on lies. Outside, the air smelled of wet pavement. Clara stopped under the awning, taking a deep breath. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "I think I will be. Not today, but soon." We stood there for a while, watching the rain blur the city lights. She turned to me then, her expression softer. "You know, part of me blamed you for telling me. But now I realize, you didn't break my heart. You just refused to keep my eyes closed." I smiled faintly. "You deserve to see." We hugged then, a long, quiet embrace. Two women bound by a man's deceit, but freed by each other's truth. A week later, I heard Daniel had quit his job and left town. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. People speculated, as they always do. But I didn't care. Some stories don't need epilogues. Clara started volunteering at a local shelter. She said helping others made her feel like she was piecing herself back together. And me? I started writing again. Not love letters or journals full of hurt, but stories. About women who survived the silence. Because sometimes, survival isn't about moving on. It's about reclaiming your voice after someone tried to rewrite it. Healing didn't come as a sudden sunrise. It came quietly, like light leaking through the cracks of a closed curtain. In the weeks that followed Daniel's disappearance from town, the noise of gossip began to fade. The whispers grew softer, the pitying glances less frequent. People moved on, as they always do when the story isn't theirs to carry. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without watching my own reflection for cracks. Clara and I started meeting again, not to talk about him, but about life, about small things. The kind of things that keep you tethered when everything else feels unsteady: recipes, childhood memories, the smell of rain on laundry days. There was a slowness to those afternoons that I cherished. We'd sit on her porch, sipping coffee while the wind rattled the leaves. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, sometimes we'd just sit in silence, letting the world be enough. One day, she said something that stayed with me. "You know what's strange," she murmured, watching the light shift through the trees. "I don't hate him anymore." I looked up, surprised. "You don't?" She shook her head. "No. I pity him. Because he'll keep doing this, lying to survive, pretending it's love. But it's not love when you're afraid to be known." Her words hit something deep in me. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for strength, silence for peace. But peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the acceptance of truth. She turned to me, her eyes steady. You were brave, Emma. You faced him before I could even see what he was. I smiled faintly. Brave or just tired of pretending? Both, she said softly. And for the first time since everything fell apart, we laughed, not out of irony or pain, but from that small, human relief that comes when you realize the worst is over. A few months later, I went back to the house Daniel and I once shared. It had been sitting empty, waiting to be sold. The real estate agent had asked me to collect a few remaining things before the new owners moved in. The air inside smelled of dust and faint memories, familiar but hollow. I walked through each room slowly, fingertips grazing the walls, the furniture we once picked together. In the bedroom, I found a box I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the back of a closet. Inside were letters, unsent drafts, receipts, an old watch of his. And beneath it all, a note in his handwriting. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a single line scrawled across the page. Some stories end not because love dies, but because truth runs out. I stared at it for a long time. For once, I didn't feel anger or grief, just understanding. He'd always been running from truth, mistaking reinvention for redemption. But there's no fresh start without honesty. You can change your name, your city, your story, but you'll always take yourself with you. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket, and left the house without looking back. That evening, I stopped by Clara's again. She was in the garden, hands deep in soil, planting something new. Roses? I asked, kneeling beside her. Lilies, she said with a smile. They're tougher than they look. I helped her press the bulbs into the earth. The soil was cool and damp beneath our fingers, grounding in a way that words could never be. Do you ever think we'll trust again? She asked suddenly. I thought for a moment. Not the same way, I said honestly. But maybe that's a good thing. We'll trust slower. Smarter. With eyes open. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. I like that. We finished planting in silence, the evening light melting into gold. As months turned into seasons, our lives began to fill with new colors. Clara started taking photography classes, finding beauty in things most people overlooked, a cracked teacup, a rain-soaked street, a child's forgotten toy on a park bench. And me? I began writing again, this time for others. Real stories, from real women. Stories of loss, resilience, and the quiet ways we rise when the world expects us to fall. Sometimes people ask if the stories are about me. I smile and say, parts of them are. Because truth, like healing, doesn't belong to one person. It ripples outward, touching others who felt the same invisible ache. One day, Clara sent me a photo she'd taken, a small bird perched on a broken fence, wings half open, ready to leave. She captioned it, "Freedom doesn't always look graceful." I looked at that picture for a long time. Because she was right. Healing is messy. Freedom is imperfect. But both are beautiful in their own unsteady way. 6 months later, I heard Daniel had remarried again. A different town, a different woman. When Clara told me, I just smiled sadly. Some people never stop rehearsing the same story. She sighed. Do you ever wonder if he's happy? Maybe, I said. But happiness built on lies never lasts. It's like painting over mold, pretty for a while, until it seeps through. We didn't talk about him after that. There was nothing left to say. One evening, as I closed my laptop after finishing another story submission, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed quiet for the sake of peace, who mistook endurance for love. I wished I could reach back in time and tell her, silence doesn't make you noble. It just delays the truth. But maybe she had to learn it the hard way, so I could be here, calm, whole, unashamed of the scars that once felt like shame. That night, I stepped out onto my balcony. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, fading like an old echo. I closed my eyes and let the wind touch my face. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt like the author. When people hear my story, they often ask if I regret telling the truth. If I wish I'd stayed silent and let Clara live in her illusion. But silence is a slow poison. It doesn't save people, it just delays their awakening. And the truth, even when it breaks hearts, still sets them free. I used to think love was about loyalty, about staying even when it hurts, forgiving even when you shouldn't. But I've learned that real love, the kind that lasts, can't live in shadows. It needs honesty like lungs need air. And as for friendship, I thought Clara and I were finished after what happened. But pain has a strange way of binding people who survive it together. She and I became sisters again, not through laughter this time, but through truth. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story of betrayal anymore. I see two women who walked through fire, and didn't let it turn them cruel. Because sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't forgiving others. It's forgiving yourself for not knowing better when you didn't know how to. So, if you're listening right now, maybe holding your own secrets, maybe standing at the edge of a truth you're afraid to speak. Ask yourself this. Would you rather protect someone's comfort, or their freedom? Because one of them keeps you loved. And the other sets you free.